The university auditorium was packed to the brim with families cheering on the graduates, the room buzzing with a steady hum of voices and the constant flash of cameras. I sat in the third row, my bachelor's degree in history, resting quietly on my lap. At 65 years old and after 5 years of widowhood, walking across that stage had been a deeply personal triumph. But my daughter-in-law Sloane, sitting 2 seats away, hadn't looked up from her phone once. My son Derek, true to form, was yawning beside her, completely checked out of his surroundings. The diploma looks really cool, Grandma," my grandson Miles said, leaning over the seat to trace the gold foil seals on the parchment. Sloane didn't even bother to lift her head. "They hand a piece of paper to just about anyone these days," she muttered dismissively, making sure her voice carried right to me. "They're basically participation trophies for seniors. You really lucked out, Eleanor." I tightened my grip on the edge of the leather binder. I studied her face for a second, taking in her expression of chronic performative boredom, but I kept my own face completely blank. I wasn't going to let her steal my joy. "I graduated with honors," I replied quietly, my voice perfectly level. "That isn't luck." Sloane finally looked at me, rolling her eyes with obvious irritation. "Oh, please. The professors go easy on you older folks so you don't feel bad. Don't take this the wrong way, but finishing adult ed is the bare minimum. Don't let it go to your head. We still need you to watch Miles all day tomorrow." I held my ground. "I hear you." "Good," she mumbled, her thumbs flying across her screen again. "Someone has to keep expectations realistic around here. Besides, Derek needs to use your big garage to store some inventory for his business." Up on stage, the ceremony was moving along. The dean introduced the director of the Fellowship and Research Committee, an elegant woman who carried a thick red folder, to the podium. "We will now move on to the annual research awards." The dean's voice boomed over the mic. "These are merit-based grants awarded to students who have produced exceptional projects." Sloane let out a quiet scoff. "Watch. They'll probably hand out a little token scholarship to everyone just so nobody gets their feelings hurt." I glanced down at the official program in my hand, running my eyes over the list of winners. What was about to happen was going to wipe that smug smile right off her face. The committee director opened her red folder with deliberate slowness. A heavy silence settled over the massive room as the audience leaned in. "Our first award is the Regional Historical Research Grant in the amount of $15,000. The woman's voice echoed through the speakers. "This fund is awarded to a student who completed an outstanding independent investigation into forgotten 19th century commercial archives." I shifted slightly in my seat, smoothing out the fabric of my dark dress. "The winner is Eleanor Weaver," the director announced with a warm smile. Miles let out a loud gasp. Sloane's thumb slammed on the brakes, freezing over her phone screen. I stood up with complete composure and made my way toward the stage. The auditorium erupted in applause, and I caught a few of my professors nodding at me with genuine pride. I walked up the short steps, shook the director's hand, and accepted the heavy certificate along with an oversized novelty check. When I got back to my seat, Sloane was staring a hole through me, her eyes narrowed. 15 grand? For what? She demanded, her brow furrowed in a deep scowl. "A project mapping out early trade routes." I answered, simply resting the giant check across my knees as if it were a magazine. "I spent all of last summer digging through the state archives." My daughter-in-law's jaw tightened. "I didn't know anything about that. You never said there was real money involved." "I brought it up at Christmas dinner," I reminded her, gently meeting her gaze. "You said it sounded like a boring hobby for retirees with too much time on their hands." Back on stage, the director was already adjusting the microphone for the next announcement. "The Cultural Preservation Grant in the amount of $20,000 goes to a student who dedicated hundreds of hours to restoring time-damaged documents. My name rang out through the speakers again, loud and clear. This time, Sloane didn't make a sound. She just watched me walk up to the stage, accept another certificate, shake a few more hands, and return to my seat. "How many of these are they giving out?" She asked, her voice noticeably higher and tighter than before. I unfolded the official program resting beneath my growing pile of awards. What was printed there would make it very clear that the night had barely just begun. I was called up to the stage 3 more times over the next 20 minutes. A literary analysis grant for $12,000, a special essay prize for $5,000, and a community service award for $10,000, sponsored by a local foundation. Sloane's expression morphed from mocking disdain to absolute chalky paleness. Her phone had been shoved back into her purse, completely forgotten. Derek, sitting next to her, seemed to have finally woken up from his nap. He slumped down in his chair, staring intensely at his own shoes, suddenly hyper-aware of the endless rounds of applause. Miles leaned over to me again, his eyes wide and shining. "Grandma, did you know you were going to win all this stuff?" "Not all of them, sweetheart." I smiled, reaching over to affectionately ruffle his hair. "A couple of them are a wonderful surprise. Nobody gave us a heads up about any of this." Sloane interrupted her tone, a messy blend of reproach and utter bewilderment. "I posted the committee nomination list in the family group chat back in February." I replied, never, dropping my relaxed demeanor. "You reacted with a thumbs-down emoji and said those things were always just scams to milk money from gullible people." The committee director stepped back up to the podium for the final announcements, pushing her glasses up the bridge of her nose. The energy in the auditorium was electric. Families were whispering to each other, captivated by the winning streak. "We have 2 remaining awards tonight, both of highly significant value," the woman announced. "The first is the Academic Excellence Fellowship, which funds a full year of overseas research in residence. It is our highest collegiate honor, valued at roughly $85,000, which includes all living expenses." You could have heard a pin drop in that room. The hum of the air conditioning was the only sound left. This year's recipient maintained a perfect GPA, demonstrated invaluable leadership in historical recovery, and successfully published in an international peer-reviewed journal. The director continued, her smile widening. "Eleanor Weaver." The applause was deafening this time. I walked to the stage for the 6th time, enveloped in a deep, profound sense of peace. When I sat back down, Sloane had her fists clenched tight in her lap. $85,000, she muttered under her breath, doing the math in real time. The dean took the center microphone. The biggest award of the night was still waiting in the wings. "There is one final accolade tonight," the dean announced, scanning the massive crowd to command total silence. "Every year we nominate one truly exceptional student for the National Research Fellowship. If selected by the Central Committee in Washington, the student receives an unconditional fund for graduate studies and fieldwork at any institution in the country." Sloane let out a shaky breath beside me. Derek leaned forward, rubbing his sweaty palms together. "We received the official notice last week." The dean continued, his chest puffed out with pride. "Out of more than 10,000 nominees nationwide, only 30 are chosen. This is the first time in the history of our department that one of our students has received this monumental honor." I already knew. I had read the official email 3 days ago, sitting alone in my kitchen, savoring the moment in total quiet while drinking my morning coffee. "Eleanor Weaver, please join us on stage one last time." The auditorium exploded. People leapt to their feet, cheering wildly. The faculty lining the walls gave a standing ovation. I walked into the glare of the spotlights one last time. The dean shook both my hands warmly, and the director handed me a heavy, beautifully engraved metal plaque. The National Fellowship covers tuition books, research travel, and a generous monthly living stipend for up to 4 years. The dean informed the stunned crowd. The total value exceeds $250,000. I heard a sharp plastic smack from the third row. Sloane's phone, which she had instinctively pulled out again, had slipped right through her fingers and crashed onto the concrete floor. She didn't even try to bend down and pick it up. By the time I returned to my seat, I had a small mountain of certificates checks and folders piled on my lap, a tangible monument to my sheer grit. Sloane was staring blankly at the shining gold surface of the national plaque. "I had no idea," my daughter-in-law whispered, her voice completely hollow, her eyes unfocused. "I talked about it during our Sunday dinners," I answered calmly. "I talked about my essays, the grueling hours I spent in the library. You just decided to tune me out." The ceremony wrapped up shortly after, but I knew the real test with my family was waiting for me out in the lobby. The cavernous auditorium lobby was a sea of noise, warm hugs, and clinking plastic cups of sparkling cider. I carefully packed my certificates and checks into a large leather portfolio I had brought specifically for this exact purpose. Derek approached me first, rubbing the back of his neck nervously. "Mom, that was incredible. Seriously, congratulations." "Thank you, Derek." I nodded, accepting his awkward, stiff hug. Sloane materialized right behind him. Her icy, dismissive attitude had vanished into thin air, replaced entirely by a tight, anxious, and almost sickly sweet smile. "Eleanor, truly, what an amazing surprise. That's nearly $400,000 altogether, right? It's funding strictly designated for academic research and education." I clarified, looking her dead in the eye. "Well, sure, but living stipends can be used for practical things," she suggested, rapidly closing the distance between us. "Derek told you about his idea to expand the auto parts business. With just a fraction of that prize money, we could rent a real storefront. And we might even be able to remodel our kitchen, especially since you'll be traveling for that overseas residency anyway." I just looked at her for a long moment. There wasn't an ounce of genuine congratulation in her words. I could practically see the dollar signs spinning frantically behind her eyes, fueled by her lifelong habit of treating what was mine as hers. "The living stipend is exactly for that, my living expenses," I replied. I didn't raise my voice, but my tone was absolute iron. "The funds are managed by a university trust. They aren't seed money for private businesses or home renovations." Sloane's fake smile faltered. "But we're family, Eleanor. We've always been your biggest support system." "Support system?" I asked, slowly arching an eyebrow. "You mean like an hour ago, when you loudly announced my degree was a participation trophy?" Derek coughed, looking mortified. "Mom, Sloane didn't mean it like that. She was just stressed from the traffic. I'm not looking for an apology, Derek. I'm just stating the facts," I said politely, cutting the conversation short. "Now, if you'll excuse me, my professors are waiting to take an official photo." I walked away from them, but I knew perfectly well they weren't going to give up that easily. I was going to have to spell it out for them. We walked out to the parking lot beneath the dim, yellow glow of the streetlights. I placed my heavy leather portfolio in the back seat of my car, making sure it was secure. "Mom, we figured we'd head over to your house to celebrate together," Derek announced, pulling open the door to his SUV. "We can order some takeout on the way." "It's getting pretty late," I replied, putting my key into the ignition. "It'll just be for a bit," Sloane insisted, poking her head out of the passenger side with that weaponized sweetness she used whenever she was trying to manipulate a situation. "Plus, we really need to hash out our schedule for Miles tomorrow, and we need to figure out the garage. Derek has some boxes he needs to drop off ASAP." I didn't argue in the parking lot. I gave a brief nod and got into my car. The drive to my house gave me 15 minutes of beautiful peace and mental clarity. By the time I pulled up, they were already parked against my curb, standing on my front porch, like they owned the place. We walked into the living room. Sloane immediately started pacing the floor, tracing her fingers over the decorations and sizing up the walls. This house really is way too big for just you, Eleanor. And now that you'll be gone for your research residencies, it's just going to sit empty. She commented, visually calculating the square footage. We could easily move in and look after the place. That way, we save on our rent, and we can pump that cash right into Derek's business. Derek nodded from the couch, practically glowing with enthusiasm. That's a great idea, Mom. You'd get the peace of mind knowing the house is safe, and we get the extra space we desperately need. I took off my coat and methodically hung it on the rack. I walked into the kitchen, poured 3 glasses of water, and carried them out to the living room, setting them down on the coffee table. That won't be necessary, I said, my voice smooth as glass. Why not? Sloane demanded, crossing her arms defensively. It's the most logical move for everyone. Because I've already made permanent arrangements for the house, I replied. I walked over to the console table near the door and pulled out a heavy cardboard box I had packed earlier that afternoon. What was inside was about to be their very first reality check. I handed the cardboard box to Derek. He took it with a deep frown, caught off guard by the weight of it. "What is this, Mom?" he asked, peering past the cardboard flaps. "Those are the tools you've been storing in my garage along with Miles's extra toys," I explained calmly, taking a seat in my armchair. I needed to have the space completely cleared out by today. Sloane marched over to the box, her face hardening. "Why, we just told you we could move in and manage the property. Because I signed a lease yesterday." I answered, taking a slow sip of my water. "A visiting professor from Georgetown is renting the entire house for the next year. He's paying me an excellent rate and handling all the upkeep. The garage is explicitly included in his contract." Derek blinked, completely dumbfounded. "You rented out the family home without even running it by us?" "It is my property, Derek," I pointed out firmly. "I don't need to run my financial or living decisions by either of you." Sloane's face flushed a deep, angry red. "But we were counting on that garage, and we were counting on you to watch Miles tomorrow and every Tuesday. Who is supposed to pick him up from school now? You're going to have to adjust your schedules, or hire a sitter," I replied softly. "My graduate program starts in 2 weeks, and it requires my full-time dedication." Sloane let out a sharp, bitter laugh. "This is ridiculous. You get a little bit of money, and suddenly you turn your back on your family responsibilities. By the way, I tried to use the joint emergency card to pay for the pizzas earlier, and it was declined." I was at the bank first thing this morning. I informed them, keeping my voice perfectly level. "I closed the joint account. I left you exactly half the funds as a parting gift. But as of today, our finances are completely separate." "You can't do that!" Derek yelled, jumping up from the couch. "That fund was our safety net. It was my savings account funded exclusively by my pension." I corrected him, my tone dropping to a freezing temperature. "It's high time you two learned the difference." "You are so unbelievably selfish," Sloane snapped completely, dropping the polite, sweet mask she had tried to glue on in the auditorium. "You spend years studying useless trivia. You get one lucky break, and now you throw us out in the cold when we need you the most. Luck isn't choking on dust in a historical archive for 6 months, Sloane," I replied, completely unfazed by her tantrum. "And selfishness isn't claiming the rights to my own time and my own money. I have made your lives incredibly easy for the last 5 years. I've bankrolled your emergencies and acted as your unpaid nanny. My shift as your employee and your personal ATM is officially over. Derek stared at me with wide eyes, looking at me as if I were a total stranger. Mom, you can't just kick us to the curb like this. We're your family. Nobody is kicking you out of my life, Derek. I'm just kicking you out of my wallet, I clarified, standing up from my armchair with quiet dignity. You are more than welcome to visit me this Sunday before my tenant moves in. But the demands the public disrespect and the constant belittling of my hard work end tonight. I walked over to the front door and pulled it wide open. The night air outside was crisp, quiet, and incredibly liberating. Sloane snatched her purse off the table with an aggressive jerk. Let's go, Derek. If she'd rather cuddle up with her little gold certificates than help her own grandson, we have absolutely nothing left to say to her. Miles will always be welcome in my life, I corrected her, locking eyes with her as she passed. And so will you two, once you learn how to knock on my door instead of trying to kick it down whenever it's convenient for you. Derek hoisted the cardboard box into his arms, his shoulders slumped in total defeat. He didn't say another word as he walked out onto the porch. Sloane blew past me without even a sideways glance. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice, and I didn't shed a single tear. I just stood there and watched them walk down the driveway to their SUV. I pushed the heavy wooden door shut and slid the deadbolt into place. The heavy metallic click echoed through the hallway, the starting gun to my true independence. The next few weeks were a chaotic blur of cardboard boxes and paperwork. I scrubbed the house top to bottom until it was spotless for the new professor. Sloane didn't call me a single time. Honestly, I enjoyed the peace and quiet. On Friday, right before I had to hand over the keys, Derek showed up on my front porch by himself. I just came to say goodbye, he mumbled, glancing at the suitcases lined up in my hallway. Sloane is still furious. She says you ruined our plans by pulling our financial support. Your plans relied entirely on my money and my free time, Derek. That was never sustainable for me. I answered calmly, taping up my final box. He let out a long breath, nodding slowly. I know. We ended up paying a neighbor to watch Miles after school, and I'm renting space in a buddy's side yard for my inventory. It's been rough, but we're making it work. I was genuinely glad to hear it. He was a grown man. He didn't need his mother to fix his life for him. I was an idiot at your graduation, he added, rubbing the back of his neck, looking genuinely ashamed. You worked really hard for those awards. I'm so sorry I didn't defend you. I accepted his apology with a small warm nod right as the sharp honk of a taxi sounded from the street. It was exactly the right time to go. 6 months later, I was sitting in the massive university library in Washington, D.C. Thanks to the fellowship funds, I was living in a beautiful, comfortable apartment, dedicating 100% of my time to my research, completely free of debt and family drama. My phone buzzed against the wooden desk. It was a text message from Derek attached to a photo. Miles drew this for you. Business has been pretty slow, but we managed to pay our own rent on time and without any help. Love from all three of us. I smiled warmly at the messy, colorful crayon drawing on my screen. There were no frantic demands for cash, no orchestrated complaints from Sloane. They had finally learned how to survive on their own 2 feet, simply because I hadn't left them any other choice. Pulling their safety net out from under them was the greatest act of love I could have ever given them. I set my phone face down and looked back at the centuries-old manuscripts spread out in front of me. I thought back to my daughter-in-law's words in the auditorium, "You lucked out." Luck hadn't spent months breathing in dust in forgotten archives. Luck hadn't found the courage to lock the front door and take total control of my future.